What do you do when your president orders you to empty the national treasury at 2 a.m., 2 days before an invasion? In Saddam's Iraq, you obey. Baghdad, the 18th of March 2003, 2 days before the American invasion. The presidential palace stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness. Outside, the city held its breath. Air raid sirens had been tested repeatedly throughout the week. Families stockpiled rice and kerosene. International journalists evacuated in convoys heading north toward Jordan and Turkey. The United Nations weapons inspectors had already left. Everyone knew what was coming. Inside a secure study on the third floor, President Saddam Hussein sat at his desk. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and old paper. He wore his military uniform, the one without insignia, the outfit he favored when making decisions he wanted no official record of. Before him lay a single sheet of presidential letterhead. The order was brief. It instructed the Central Bank of Iraq to release $920 million in U.S. currency and €100 million in euros to the bearer of the document. The stated purpose: national security operations. No further explanation. No itemized budget. No oversight committee. He signed his name. The ink glistened under the desk lamp. Within hours, 3 unmarked trucks would arrive at the Central Bank of Iraq. By dawn, they would carry nearly $1 billion in cash by direct command of the president into the disintegrating night of a dying regime. The phone call reached Central Bank Governor Saad al-Rawi at 2:17 a.m. He had not been sleeping. No one in Baghdad slept properly anymore. The city existed in a state of suspended catastrophe, waiting for the blow everyone knew was coming. Al-Rawi sat in his living room with the lights off, listening to the hum of the generator in his garden. Electricity had been intermittent for weeks. The regime was conserving power for military operations. The streets outside his villa were silent. Curfew had been in effect since sunset. Military convoys moved through the darkness without headlights, their destinations unknown. Fighter jets screamed overhead at irregular intervals, patrolling for incoming missiles. The entire city had the feeling of an organism bracing for trauma, every system shutting down except those essential for survival. The voice on the phone was clipped, official, uninterested in pleasantries. A presidential order was being transmitted immediately. The governor was to report to the bank within 30 minutes. He was to prepare the main vault. He was to speak to no one. Al-Rawi understood immediately. In Saddam's Iraq, hesitation was treason. Questions were weakness. Compliance was survival. He dressed in the dark, kissed his sleeping wife without waking her, and drove through empty streets toward the bank. Checkpoints waved him through without inspection. They had been told he was coming. The Central Bank of Iraq sat in the heart of the capital, a fortress of stone and steel built in the optimistic years after nationalization. Its vaults contained the reserves that backed the Iraqi dinar, the cash that paid government salaries, the emergency funds meant to sustain the state through crisis. The building had survived the Iran-Iraq War, the Gulf War. Decades of sanctions. Its walls were 3 feet thick. Its security systems, though outdated by Western standards, were formidable by regional ones. When al-Rawi arrived, 6 other senior bank officials were already there, summoned by the same midnight calls. They stood in the lobby without speaking, their faces gray in the fluorescent light. No one asked questions. In a dictatorship, the less you know, the safer you are. They had all learned this lesson years ago. The head of security unlocked the vault room doors. The metal hinges creaked in the silence. At 4:12 a.m., the trucks arrived. They came through the rear entrance, escorted by vehicles from the Special Republican Guard, Saddam's most elite unit, composed of tribal loyalists from Tikrit, men whose families had been elevated to wealth and power through their proximity to the president. These were not common soldiers. They moved with the quiet efficiency of professionals executing a rehearsed plan. The man who stepped out of the lead vehicle was Qusay Hussein, the younger son, the heir apparent, the Minister of Defense. He was 36 years old, lean and controlled, wearing civilian clothes, dark trousers, a leather jacket. He carried no weapon. He didn't need to. Unlike his brother Uday, known for his volatility and sadism, Qusay operated with cold precision. He had managed Iraq's internal security apparatus for years, overseeing the Special Security Organization, the Republican Guard, and the vast network of informants that kept his father in power. If Uday was the regime's idol, impulse and cruelty, Qusay was its superego, calculating and methodical. He had prepared for this moment, perhaps for weeks, perhaps for months. Qusay nodded to the governor.
You received the order.
It was not a question. Al-Rawi handed him the faxed document, already trembling in his hands. Qusay glanced at it without interest and passed it to an aide.
Begin!
Qusay said. The withdrawal lasted 5 hours. It was conducted in near silence. Bank staff, roused from their homes, moved like automatons. They unlocked cages. They counted bundles. They loaded metal cases onto dollies and wheeled them toward the loading bay. The repetition became hypnotic. Lift, stack, sign, repeat. The money came in shrink-wrapped bricks. Each brick contained 100 bills. 10 bricks made a bundle. 4 bundles filled a case. The cases were aluminum, military-grade, stamped with serial numbers no one bothered to record. $920 million in US currency. 100 million in euros. Together, the haul equaled roughly $1.4 billion in 2003 dollars, nearly $2.3 billion adjusted for inflation today. It was more than Iraq's entire annual health budget. It was 3 times the Ministry of Education's yearly expenditure. It was the equivalent of every public employee's salary for 4 months. The physical weight was staggering. $1 million in $100 bills weighs approximately 22 pounds. The entire withdrawal weighed over 20 tons. Soldiers formed a human chain from vault to truck. They worked in pairs, grunting under the load, their boots scraping against the polished floor. Sweat darkened their uniforms despite the cool night air. No one spoke except to confirm counts. The rhythm became mechanical. Count, load, sign, move. Count, load, sign, move. Some of the bank employees wept quietly as they worked. They understood what this meant. They were dismantling their country's future, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. But there was no choice. To refuse would mean death not just for them, but for their families. The Special Republican Guard didn't leave witnesses who disobeyed. Qusay watched from a chair in the corner, smoking. He checked his watch periodically but showed no impatience. Occasionally, he consulted with an officer, their conversation too quiet to overhear. He signed exactly 1 document that night, a handwritten acknowledgement on bank stationery confirming receipt of the funds. It was the only official record ever created. By 9 a.m., the vaults were empty. 37 cases of cash sat in 3 covered trucks. The convoy prepared to leave through the rear gate, taking service roads that bypassed the city center. At 9:15 a.m., they disappeared into Baghdad's labyrinth of alleyways and boulevards, heading northwest. Bank employees stood in the loading bay, watching the dust settle. The governor dismissed them without ceremony. They returned to their homes through streets that felt different now, lighter, as if the city itself had lost ballast. Inside the central bank, the vault doors hung open. The empty shelves gleamed under the lights. By nightfall, the first American cruise missiles would strike targets across Baghdad. But Iraq's financial collapse had already begun. The 19th of March 2003, 9:30 p.m. local time. President George Walker Bush addressed the American people from the White House.
American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
40 minutes later, the first Tomahawk missiles struck. Operation Iraqi Freedom, or Operation Shock and Awe, as the media dubbed it, began with surgical strikes on government buildings, communications towers, and presidential palaces. The night sky over Baghdad lit up with explosions and tracer fire. International news cameras, positioned on hotel rooftops, broadcast the bombardment live to a watching world. While bombs fell, Iraq's financial infrastructure imploded. The immediate effect was invisible, but catastrophic. Government ministries, already on edge, found themselves unable to access operating funds. Hospitals that relied on central disbursements couldn't pay suppliers. Pharmaceutical imports stopped. Doctors worked without anesthesia. Surgeons reused gloves. Public sector salaries, which employed over 60% of Iraq's workforce, froze overnight. Teachers, civil servants, soldiers, millions of families suddenly had no income. Markets that operated on credit collapsed. The Iraqi dinar, pegged artificially high by regime decree, plummeted on black markets. Banks closed. ATMs went dark. People hoarded cash, but cash itself was becoming worthless. Inflation spiraled. A loaf of bread that cost 250 dinars on March 18 cost 1,500 dinars by March 25. By April, basic goods were traded by barter. A generator for a car, gold jewelry for medicine. The entire monetary system that held society together simply evaporated. The economic chain reaction mirrored the military assault. But while bombs destroyed buildings, the bank heist destroyed the mechanism that kept a nation functioning. Saddam Hussein had not simply stolen money. He had performed financial evisceration on his own country. The regime's final act was not resistance. It was extraction. May 19, 2003. American forces had occupied Baghdad for 37 days. The regime had collapsed faster than anyone anticipated. Saddam's statue in Firdos Square was pulled down on April 9th. Major combat operations were declared over on May 1st, but the president himself remained at large. A team from the 4th Infantry Division, conducting systematic searches of presidential properties, entered a palace complex in the Adamiyah neighborhood of northern Baghdad. The complex was one of dozens Saddam had built, ornate, excessive, each more lavish than the last. This one featured gold-plated fixtures, Italian marble, and chandeliers weighing half a ton. In a locked room in the basement, soldiers found 37 aluminum cases stacked against the wall. The first case opened revealed neat rows of $100 bills, bundled and vacuum-sealed. The second case was the same. So was the third. They stopped opening cases and called for senior officers. By evening, the entire cash had been inventoried. $650 million in US currency, along with smaller amounts in euros and Iraqi dinars. It was the largest single cash recovery in US military history, larger than any drug seizure, larger than any criminal forfeiture, larger than anything anyone had ever encountered. The discovery stunned investigators. The bills were pristine, sequential, still wrapped in Federal Reserve bands. Some had never been circulated. This wasn't pocket money or emergency funds. This was a substantial portion of a nation's treasury, sitting in a dictator's basement like furniture and storage. The Pentagon issued a brief statement confirming the find. Brigadier General Vincent Brooks, speaking from Qatar, called it a significant discovery related to the former regime's assets. But questions immediately arose. Intelligence reports and financial audits indicated that Saddam had withdrawn nearly $1 billion from the central bank. If $650 million had been recovered, where was the rest? $270 million were missing. Theories proliferated. Some intelligence analysts believed the money had been smuggled into Syria, driven across the border in the chaotic final days before the invasion. Others suggested it was buried in caches near Tikrit, Saddam's ancestral home, hidden in preparation for an insurgency. Still others theorized it had been distributed to loyalists as payment for future resistance bribes to tribal leaders, funding for safe houses, seed money for the insurgency that would soon engulf the country. None of these theories were ever confirmed. The money simply vanished, absorbed into the collapse of a nation. July 22, 2003. Mosul. Acting on intelligence from an informant, US forces surrounded a villa in the upscale Falan neighborhood. The house belonged to a cousin of Saddam Hussein. Neighbors reported seeing unusual activity: armed men, blacked-out vehicles, deliveries after dark. American commanders believed Qusay and Hussein, Saddam's sons, were inside. The siege began at dawn. Loudspeakers ordered the occupants to surrender. Instead, automatic weapons fire erupted from the upper floors. The battle lasted 4 hours. US forces fired Tau missiles into the building. Helicopters provided air support. The villa's facade crumbled under the assault. When soldiers finally entered, they found 4 lifeless figures. 2 were identified as Qusay and Hussein. Both had fallen in combat. Qusay was found clutching an AK-47. Wounds spread across his chest. Uday was in an adjacent room, similarly armed. His fight also ended there. The brothers had been inseparable life partners in cruelty, in excess, in their father's grand crimes. They passed together, defiant to the end. December 13, 2003. Ad-Dar, near Tikrit, a farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Informants reported a suspicious pattern of visitors to a property owned by a former bodyguard. American forces cordoned off the area and began searching. In a walled compound behind the main house, soldiers noticed a small depression in the ground, partially concealed by bricks and dirt. Beneath it, a styrofoam plug. Beneath that, a hole approximately 6 feet deep, lined with orange foam and ventilation pipes. At the bottom, a man with a wild beard and unkempt hair crouched in the darkness. Saddam Hussein did not resist. He raised his hands and allowed himself to be pulled from the hole. He looked nothing like the dictator in the portraits that had once hung in every government building. He was gaunt, disoriented, his uniform replaced by traditional robes caked in dirt. Soldiers searched him. In his pockets, a pistol, unfired. 2 AK-47 rifles lay nearby in the hole, also unused. And one other item. A single $100 bill, folded and tucked into his shirt pocket. The man who had stolen $1 billion ended his reign with $100 in cash. A U.S. Army medic examined him on sight, checking for weapons or wounds. Saddam was compliant, almost docile. He identified himself calmly.
I am Saddam Hussein, President of Iraq. I am willing to negotiate.
The soldiers ignored this. There would be no negotiation. His war was over. The US-led Coalition Provisional Authority launched a comprehensive audit of Iraq's finances in the summer of 2003. The scale of the theft slowly became clear. Investigators confirmed that Saddam Hussein's handwritten order from March 18 was legitimate under Iraqi law as it existed at the time. The Iraqi constitution granted the president emergency powers during wartime, including unilateral control over state finances. There was no oversight, no countersignature required, no parliamentary approval. In other words, the withdrawal was legal. A dictator, stealing from his own country using the authority of the state itself. Pentagon officials struggled to describe the act. It wasn't a bank robbery in the conventional sense. It was self-theft, an autocrat looting his own treasury under the legal framework he had created. One U.S. Treasury investigator, speaking anonymously to the Washington Post in 2004, called it the purest expression of kleptocracy we've ever documented. It wasn't stolen by looters. It was stolen by the state, from itself. Subsequent investigations revealed that even the $650 million recovered by American forces largely disappeared. Some were used for reconstruction projects. Some went into operating funds for the Coalition Provisional Authority. But oversight was minimal, accounting haphazard. In the chaos of occupation, billions in both Iraqi and American funds were siphoned off through corruption, mismanagement, and outright fraud. Iraq's National Audit Office would later estimate that over $20 billion in Iraqi funds vanished during the first 2 years of occupation. Some stolen by insurgents, much of it lost through systemic corruption involving both Iraqis and foreign contractors. The central bank heist, dramatic as it was, became just one chapter in a much longer story of financial pillage. Congressional investigations in 2005 and 2007 documented systematic failures in tracking reconstruction funds. Pallets of cash, literally billions of dollars, were flown into Iraq on military transport planes and distributed with virtually no documentation. Some were stolen, some were lost, some simply evaporated into the fog of war and incompetence. History remembers Saddam Hussein for mass graves, chemical weapons, invasions, and the cult of personality that defined his rule. The central bank heist rarely appears in those narratives. It was overshadowed by war, by insurgency, by the chaos that followed regime collapse. But for Iraqis, the heist became something else, a parable of betrayal. Saddam's reign had always blurred the line between state and family. His sons held ministerial posts. His cousins commanded military units. His tribe from Tikrit controlled the security apparatus. Iraq's wealth was never public. It was personal, an extension of the Hussein family's power. The central bank withdrawal was simply the final, most explicit expression of that reality. The regime didn't fall and then got looted. It was looted as it fell, by the very men who had built it. For ordinary Iraqis, the teachers who went unpaid, the doctors who worked without supplies, the families who watched their savings evaporate, March 18, 2003, became a date as significant as the invasion itself. It was the night their future was loaded into trucks and driven away. Economically, the heist accelerated Iraq's collapse. The missing funds would have paid salaries, stabilized the currency, maintained services during the transition. Instead, they vanished, leaving a void that insurgency and corruption rushed to fill. Symbolically, it marked something darker, the moment a state turned on itself, when the apparatus meant to protect a nation instead consumed it. The Central Bank of Iraq still stands in Baghdad, rebuilt and operational. Its vaults are full again, backed by oil revenues and international reserves. But Iraqis, who remember that night, see it differently. The empty vault from March 2003 exists now as a kind of ghost, invisible but permanent, a monument to what was taken. A reminder that the invasion didn't destroy Iraq's financial stability. It exposed that it was already gone. Saddam Hussein did that himself. The heist remains, like so many crimes of that era, unresolved. Some of the missing money may still be buried in the desert near Tikrit. Some may have funded the insurgency that killed thousands. Some may sit in foreign accounts, laundered through shell companies and intermediaries. But most likely, it's simply gone spent, dispersed, lost in the collapse of a regime that understood wealth only as power, and power only as extraction. In the end, the dictator who robbed his own nation left behind not just mass graves and ruined cities, but something quieter and more insidious, proof that a state can commit crime, $1 billion at a time,